All right, so hello and welcome everyone, those here in the audience and those that will be following us through the YouTube channel of the Cañada-Blanch Centre at the LSE to this new rendition, the Michaelmas 2022 rendition of the Cañada-Blanch Fellows Lecture, feature the Cañada-Blanch Prize winner, Carro, and one of our two Miguel Dols fellows, the fellows in honor of Miguel Dols, who is a great donor to the Cañada-Blanch and the institution here, Pablo and Andrés, on presenting their research and actually hopefully establishing a dialogue and discussion about the topics that you're going to cover. So the rules, you know what it is. You have up to a maximum of 20 minutes to give your presentation, and then it will be followed by questions, if there are any, from the audience, and my comments and feedback from me, and perhaps that would lead to a discussion and some improvement in the research we were conducting. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Professor Pablo Andrés from the Universitat Autonoma of Madrid, who's going to be talking about equity, crowdfunding, and the democratization of finance. So Pablo, the floor is yours.
Good, thank you. Good evening. I would like to start by thanking the Cañada-Blanch Centre and its director the opportunity to be here, to offer the opportunity to be here for this outstanding university as a Miguel Dols fellow. That is I'm going to talk about a new development in finance, that is equity crowdfunding, that has its roots in the social changes and the digital revolution of the last 10 years. But let me motivate a little bit more this new development. The decision about which idea is going to be financed, is going to get institutional support, is going to get in the marketplace, has depended on the criterion, on the adjustment of a few talented, very connected, very well connected people, the venture capitalists in this industry. But in the last 10 years, a new development, a new way equity crowdfunding has emerged as an innovation in the entrepreneurial finance space that use the power of the social media, the power of social media, to provide a new channel linking investors with entrepreneurs, linking the crowd with startups. That's the idea. And equity crowdfunding is an innovation that offers something that the other financial mechanisms do not. A way to democratize the access to capital, to produce goods and services, and to push innovation. A way to put the growth opportunities, the new or the future growth opportunities generated by the new startups in the hands of the crowd, of the investors. Maybe why not? It's also this full screen. Yeah. Yes, perfect. And maybe it's an innovation who allows to reduce the persistent gap in the first steps of the life of the companies, the startups. And you know, there is in the financing of the startups, there is a gap at the beginning of the company, the life of the company, and you are not going to find venture capital or business angels the first step, because they invest in the company when the company has something has generated a flow or has some more or less developed product or service. You can find the first step of the company, the startup, family, you can find friends, you can find false sometimes. And maybe equity crowdfunding is a new way to resolve this persistent gap in the financing of startups. Maybe we'll see if equity crowdfunding fulfill this one. Okay, my presentation is structured as follows. I'm going to talk about what is equity crowdfunding, or precisely how equity crowdfunding works, and which are the key players in equity crowdfunding. And I think this is my fault. No. Yeah. I'm going to talk about the main problems of this new financing mechanism. That is a common problem. This is asymmetric information problem. Some solutions analysis from the field, and I'm going to talk a little what we have done and what we are doing. And if we have time, I'm going to show you some figures and graphics and showing you the US equity crowdfunding market. Equity crowdfunding is a financial innovation that allows entrepreneurs or startups to make a public solicitation of money or funds to finance themselves in exchange for securities, financial assets through an online platform. That's very important in this mechanism, online platform. This request for money is aimed to non-accredited investors. I mean, sometimes accredited investors can participate, but usually it's aimed to non-accredited investors, the crowd. And linking startup and crowd investors, equity crowdfunding creates a new market in this to finance companies and complements and some cases enhance the other traditional for mechanisms, financing mechanisms like the two capital, the angels, or even the financial institutions, the banks. At these operations, the equity crowdfunding financing take place on online platforms that have standardized the process and offers. I mean, this is very important because this platform plays a crucial role in equity crowdfunding, as we'll see later. How equity crowdfunding works? I'm going to explain in a dynamic way. If an entrepreneur or startup wants to finance in this market, he has to go to a platform with a proposal, to ask for some amount of money in exchange of securities, equity, for instance, and the platform is going to require the entrepreneur a lot of information about the company, about the project, to be financed. And it's going to analyze in deep all information and to conduct due diligence, very good due diligence, and trying to filter and selection the offerings or the campaigns or the proposals with more quality. If the proposal is accepted, the platform organizes all requirements, organize the campaign, and with many details. I mean, the campaign is aimed to the non-accredited investors, to the crowd. Sometimes there are accredited investors as well. It is a co-investment. Usually, the campaign or the offering lasts on average 3 months. And when the campaign ends, can be successful or can be failed. It's successful if the amount raised exceeds the amount targeted. And the exchange is done, and the investors become shareholders under the conditions designed in the contract, with some valuation, some voting rights, some shareholder structure, and so on. And as shareholders, as investors, they expect to get a financial return and take, and benefit of the future growth opportunities of the company. This is the financing mechanism in equity crowdfunding, and as the rest of the financing mechanisms, there is a very important problem behind. That is the asymmetric information problem. I mean, we work in a context of imperfect information, and the most important part of this imperfect information is asymmetric information, because this mechanism is a exchange. It's money for securities, and there is a before and after of the exchange. We have problems ex ante before, we have problems ex post after. Ex ante, we have the adverse selection problem, because the entrepreneur, the insiders, have more information about the project, about the company, than the crowd. And this is a problem. This is a problem to make decisions, if invest or not invest. And ex post, there is the moral hazard problem. Once the contract has been signed, the investors are not able to guarantee that the entrepreneur is going to use the funds in a way benefit the investors. I mean, this is impossible to anticipate all possible actions in a contract, and this is always present. This problem, the moral hazard problem, and you have to take in mind that the investors have usually very small participations. They have no incentive nor the capacity to monitor the entrepreneur, and the participation is very limited. They cannot sell in a long period of time. And this is very important to reduce these problems, because if you don't reduce these problems or solve some of these problems, I mean, it's probably that the market of this mechanism doesn't work properly. And there are some solutions. One of them is disclose information about the project, the entrepreneur, the company. I mean, reduce the adverse selection process, the problem. And here the platforms play a crucial role before and during the offering, disclosing information about the company, about the campaign. And another one is to design proper incentives and governance mechanisms to reduce the moral hazard problem. There are a lot of them in the literature. There are quite a few papers analyzing these problems. I don't want I would like to talk just about two of them, because one day is a paper that we present published in a financial journal, and another one is we are working now. This is the 2 points. The first one, what we have already done, the role of platforms to improve the success of it. We wanted to know if there are some platform characteristics, features that increase the probability of success of equity crowdfunding campaigns. And we did that using offerings, US offering in the period 2016-2019, more than 700 offerings or campaigns, belonging to more than 1,500 firms. We estimate a product model. In that model, we try to explain the success as a function of firm characteristics, offering characteristics, and platform characteristics. We got two main results in this paper. The first one, the competition between platforms increase the success rate, and this is a very economical result. I mean, competition always helps to improve the mechanism. And the second one is the probability of success increase when the platform receives the fee for its services as a combination of cash and securities of the offer. I mean, that is a very important, very, very nice result. I'm very interesting from the perspective of the asymmetric information theory, because when the platform accepts securities as a payment of this, or for services, is putting a skin in the game, is linking its performance with the performance of the company, with the result of the company. I mean, summarizing the results of the paper, signaling for platforms, reduce information problems, and increase the success of offerings of these mechanisms campaigns. The other one is what we are doing, and this is about the terms of contracts. We want to analyze the terms of contracts. There is a contract between the entrepreneur or the startup and investors. And we want to analyze the terms of contracts in each offer. We want to find out if there is some terms that allow to reduce the moral hazard problem and to increase the success of the offerings. And even more, not only the current offerings, even more the success of future financing rounds, financing campaigns. I mean, some recent questions that we want to answer. Are there any offering terms that could make it more attractive to crowd investors and to accredited investors? What terms of the offering make easy the governance issues after the campaign is over? Are there any shareholder strategy that performs better than others in terms of to reduce the moral hazard problem? And we are looking at the terms of contracts of US offerings. We have collected information of 1,000 contracts, and we would like to reach 1,500. This is still a work in progress, but we are working on it. Tell me something about our marketplace. I mean, the US equity crowdfunding market, because we choose to work with this market. It started in 2016 as a consequence of the pass of the Jobs Act. Jobs means jumping our business startups. And was designed by the Obama administration with the goal that the American startups could benefit of the digital revolution. I mean, it's a very interesting purpose. And they were studying the functioning of the market from 2012 to 2016, 4 years, studying the best development of the market in the US. The Jobs Act approved 2 exceptions to the Security Market Act. I remember you that this act, is from 1934 in the US. The 4C and 4A plus are the exception of this Security Market Act. 4C is the equity crowdfunding rule, and is the main Jobs Act innovation for startups, I think in decades in the US. How we got this information? We put a crawler in the Security Exchange Commission to download the facts of each offering in the US. And we also designed a software to collect more information. This software is a proprietary software that the team I lead in the Autonoma University with Colisio Technologies, that is a startup that 2 of my doctoral students said, design a software to take photos of the platform web page each hour. And this software is able to translate the picture in information, in a lot of information about the campaign, the social networks, the path of investors, and some information. And we are using this information to do better research. I don't know if we have time to show some figures.
About 3 or 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes. Okay. I'm going to show you how is the US equity crowdfunding market to make an idea. Okay, this is the information. Wisdom is part of the company. I mean, you can see from the beginning of the market 2016, the evolution of the market. This is clearly is growing quarter on quarter. You can see in accumulate with accumulated quarters. You can see the growth is quite exponential. I mean, this is quarter by quarter is growing the market, the number of campaigns they offer. And you can see in the dark columns the success of the offerings. I mean, the number of successful offerings is also growing, but this measure the popularity and the efficiency of this market. I mean, this is the number of offering by mega tranches. This is the number of successful offering by amount of money raised. You can be distributed in different tranches from 0 to $100,000, 100 to 500, $500,000, $1 million, until 5 million. That is the maximum. There's more information. I can show you. I mean, I think in the US, equity crowdfunding is already a universal phenomenon. But there is some states that I mean, where is more popular. In California, the top 5 are California. I mean, this is where the innovation is. New York, Texas, Maryland, and Florida. This is the success rate. This is a classification number of offerings by asset. I mean, not every asset is equity. There is some equity is the most popular, debt, convertible debt, and SAFE. SAFE is a very interesting asset in the online financing setup, because it's not equity, it's the possibility of have future equity. It's security agreement for future equity. This is success rate. I mean, this is by industry. This is the platforms. I mean, there are almost 100 platforms in the US, 100. But the top 5 accumulate 75% of the offerings. And there is a huge concentration. You can see the different strategies. In colors, you have the number of offerings, and the golden line is the success rate of the offering. You can see this platform, Republic, is the third one. And I mean, the success rate is incredible. This is 85% managing this campaign, this offerings. Okay, that's the information. There is some specialization of platforms in securities. I mean, you have the Capital and the Star Engine specialized in equity, that may based in debt, Republic, and we founded in SAFE. I think it's very important, the specialization in one asset, because the platform plays a very important role, giving information, analyzing the company, the offering. I mean, and if they are specializing, I think they can do a better analysis. This is success rate. There is in the last quarters, there is some offerings with an ESG orientation, environment, social, and governance orientation, with a success rate quite good, that is above the 50% of the offerings. And if you analyze the social media of the offerings, because in the platform, in the web page, you have social media, I mean, the sentiment of the investors are biased to the right. That's to say that the sentiment of investor is positive about the use of this industry. And this is a very important element of the industry. I mean, by way of conclusion, our goal is to contribute to the development of this alternative market for startup. From the theory and the practice, we are building an infrastructure, improving the infrastructure to obtain richer data and to do better in research, and using always good theory and this richer data to check our hypothesis and try to improve the functioning of the equity crowdfunding market. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Pablo.
Good.
Now you face like questions from the audience. So does anyone in the audience have got questions? Go ahead, Ines.
Yeah, so my question more about like the future technologies with regards to equity crowdfunding. So I know that like blockchain is becoming very
Yes.
popular with regards to like distributed ledgers, immutability, and I know it's a way which big banks are using to fractionalize funding. So you don't necessarily have to fund 30% of a bond, you can do 0.1% of a bond. Is this going to make a big difference with regards to the different platforms that are available right now? And do you think it is possible that it might increase the trust and it might encourage more investors to actually get involved in the market?
Yeah, okay, it's a very good question. I mean, the essence is the same, it's the crowd. And this is the power of social media to reach to the crowd investors and to finance companies. But in the case of the equity crowdfunding market, you have a very good legislation, very good law protecting investors, and you have the platforms. The platform plays a crucial role to protect and to disclose information and to keep the campaigns and the offerings in good terms. But in fact, there is no fraud. There is no scams in the equity crowdfunding. You have for two things: the law. I mean, the law is very demanding to protect investors and the platforms. But in the case of blockchain, you don't have the law, you don't have regulation now, and you don't have a platform because it's a decentralized system. I mean, I think the blockchain is going to my idea that is going to blockchain is going to work in a quasi-decentralized world. I mean, I think some kind of permission is going to be necessary to operate with blockchain to protect investors. And that's the difference. That's the difference. But the power, the potential power of blockchain is immense. I mean, it's huge. But I think the countries and the big regions, because they're not the countries, it's the world, has to be a very good regulation to protect investors from scams, from fraud. So, very good first.
Any other questions? No, then go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, regarding with the importance of the platforms, you kind of stress in one moment, I was talking about the moral hazard
Yes.
and the relevance of platforms in moral hazards after the investment has been produced.
Yeah.
And you have been talking about these platforms getting equity in the race.
Yes.
I mean, and I know because, I mean, not for businesses, because this is in case for businesses who have like growth, but equity crowdfunding has existed before, and platforms have existed before for investments in, I don't know, real estate, for example, and that is common in Europe and as well as in the US. And I wanted to, the question is about risk of trusting these platforms. And I mean, they have vested interests. They can have vested interests on the company's future. But is it really? Do they really have vested interests on the investors? So.
Yeah, I think so. I think they have interest in investors. I mean, the most important thing to think about platforms is the reputational concern. I mean, they have the reputation at stake, and that's the most powerful incentive that the platforms work. I mean, to take equity from the offerings is like a signal to investors that you have to take in mind that the platforms have conducted a very deep due diligence of the offering. If the platform is getting securities from the offering, this is a signal, a very certain signal of the commitment of the platform with the offer. and with the performance of the company. And the two things, I mean, reputational concerns to survive as platform and to fulfill the law. That is very important because the law is looking at the platform and putting skin in the play. That's the idea.
Okay, so this is not my area,
Okay.
so I don't know whether, but first you've been talking about success
Yes.
all the time. What do you exactly mean by success?
Success is to raise more funds that you targeted, you ask for.
All right, so that's getting the money to do the
Yes.
things, but does that actually lead to greater, let's say, more jobs, more economy,
Yeah.
economic dynamism? And do you go beyond just getting the funding
Yeah.
and looking at the impact on the real economy?
Yes. I mean, that's a very important, but it's a very good question, but the age of this industry is very short. I mean, it's starting. We don't have papers about or analysis about the success of the startups in several years after the. We have some papers talking about what has been the success of startups in new financial rounds, in new financial campaigns. That's, I mean, it's important. There's a correlation, positive correlation between the success in a equity crowdfunding campaign and future financial rounds.
My second question goes a bit in Victor's side, because there's a gap in the market.
Yes.
In which you have, on the one hand, entrepreneurs that have ideas that they want to set up a startup, and you have would-be investors, and they don't have information. So you have the platforms that come in, but this is a new industry.
Yes.
And the names that you mentioned, maybe because something reflects that I'm not in the
Yes.
field. I knew none of the names there. So if I'm a potential investor, how do I trust that the platforms are going to be more reliable? Of course, you talked about reputation, but for most investors, especially the type, not the venture capitalists, but the type of investors that want to invest, names might mean nothing. So you have a problem of you don't have information or adequate information about the entrepreneurs, but you don't have adequate information about the platforms. Where can you get that information? And along the lines of what Victor was saying, who polices the platforms to make sure that they don't misbehave and they function adequately?
Yeah, I said you don't have a lot of information, but year you have more information about the platforms, about the success of platform, about the specialization of platforms in some assets, in some industries. I mean, you have more information. The typical investor in equity crowdfunding is a non-accredited investor, and they have very limited investment in the effort. I mean, it's just a small amount of money, and it's risky. I mean, you are invested in the first step of a startup, and it's very risky. But maybe you are invested in the next unicorn. I mean, you don't know. You don't know. I mean, these are very risky industry, very risky companies. But who are behind the platforms? The market authority, the law. I mean, they have to fulfill many requirements to operate, to perform their activity. And I mean, there is no fraud so far. I mean, this industry. I don't know. It's general. It's reputational concerns. Is many things, but there's no fraud, no scams. No scams. That's amazing. I mean, maybe in the future we have some scams and fraud because this is the capitalism, and it's probably to have some. Yeah.
Can you name a few success stories from equity crowdfunding? That like names that we know of currently as
success offering.
companies who have
No,
very
no,
successful.
I cannot tell you names right now. I mean, I have to go
So
to my paper.
none of the unicorns.
No. There is no. There is no unicorns. So yeah. This is very young industry. I mean, 10 years. In the case of the US, it's 6 years. With the COVID, with the pandemic in the middle, that you can see that the number of offerings increased significantly during the pandemic. I mean, activity of this industry didn't stop.
Right, and I think time is of essence, so the final question from me, you highlighted how this is a growing industry in the US.
Yeah.
But what is its presence in Europe? And is there, let's say, a platform sort of sector for crowdfunding in a country like Spain, for example, or
Yeah.
UK?
I mean, the UK is the main industry, political funding industry around the world. I mean, it started in 2009, and in volume of assets is the biggest, and the US is the second one. But the US is growing exponentially. I mean, I think in some moment it's going to be the leader of the political funding industry, because the US is a big country. But it's very important in the UK. That is where equity funding started at the beginning, and is quite important in France and Germany. It's was very important in China, but the lending crowdfunding, not the equity crowdfunding, it's other kind of crowdfunding. And it's just starting in Spain and Italy and other countries in the Central Europe. That's the situation, the geography of this industry.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pablo, for your presentation. And now we go to our Cañada-Blanch Prize winner, Maria Carro, from Carro-Pitarch, from the University of Valencia, so graduate in law, who's going to be talking about the BBNJ agreement, a closer look at the role of the European Union in the current negotiations. First, what you're going to have to tell us is what is it that the BBNJ agreement is. So the floor is yours.
I will put the timer on to not pass my time. Thank you very much for coming this evening. And I have to say first thank you to Professor Andrés for his kind welcome to LSE and to Victor, and also thanks to the Fundación Cañada-Blanch for allowing me to do this research stay this past few months. So as the professor said, what is the BBNJ agreement? That's the big question, which I will promise I answer later. But first, the scope or where it comes from is of my PhD that I'm working on. So I am working right now on the international legal regime of marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction, and particularly whether this agreement that I will talk about will fill the legal gaps that exist nowadays in this area. So inside of this big scope, which is my PhD, I have been focusing lately on the EU's role in this agreement, in the negotiations that have been taking place internationally. So I have been looking at the EU's external action competences, because as you know, the EU works through this principle of conferral, so only through the competencies that have been attributed by the member states. Also have been looking at the EU's position in certain items. And then finally, I have been trying to analyze whether the EU has been an effective negotiator, if we can even use this word of effectivity so far in the, or effectiveness so far in negotiations. So what is really the BBNJ agreement? It stands for an instrument that is legally binding and that is being negotiated right now under the auspices of the Convention of the United Nations on the Law of the Sea. And it deals with the conservation, but also on the sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. So as I know that this is a very interdisciplinary, both panel and public, I'm going to do some precisions beforehand and not go right into the effectiveness of the EU's role. So this agreement, it focused on the areas of international jurisdiction, which as you can see are the dark blue areas of the map. And they encompass around 2/3 of the surface of our oceans and around 95% of the volume of the ocean. So it's quite a big part of the earth that is not regulated right now, and that will be through this agreement if it passes. Legally speaking, this is translated into the high seas and the area, which is known as the seabed or the ocean floor, as defined by the Convention on the United of UNCLOS of the Law of the Sea. So in this big area of the ocean that right now does not have any regulation of this topic, so therefore there is a very big legal gap in which it works sort of a first come first served for the countries who want to do activities there. So it's only focusing this agreement on the marine biological diversity. I have done a personal adaptation of the definition of the conventional biological diversity. So when we think of this marine biodiversity, we can think of the variability among living marine organisms and the ecological complexes that they have. So why is this important, and why are there so many countries that are interested both in the private, like in the public sector, but also a very big interest in the private sector? It's because of all the benefits that we can extract from this marine biological diversity. The UN has a very long list of what we can extract from this diversity. But for example, we could think of living organisms. We can think of fish, which is part of our diets. We could think of the fishery industry, which this one is set aside in the future agreement because it's already regulated through other texts. But we can also think, for example, on scientific knowledge. A lot of scientists have been using, for example, the patterns of how biological diversity moves of these organisms to predict the effects of climate change. And then also, that's the one I focus mostly, marine genetic resources. So these ones are any part of a plant or an animal or a microbia that is a functional unit of hereditates. And these ones are very important for the pharma industry and also for the cosmetic industry. And to understand why I give it so much importance that I'm writing my PhD about it, I think the easiest way is through an example. So I'm sure you're all familiar with COVID-19, sadly. But what many may not know are like the PCRs that we have been using in the past 2 years that have told us if we had to stay inside or if we had to go to the doctor, where they come from. They are a test that is known as polymerase chain reaction. And these ones, what they do is that they take our genetic material, they open it, and then they check for a pathogen. In this case, it was COVID, but it has also been used for other sicknesses. And they only were able to do this test through bacteria that was found in the water, and that it allowed to stabilize the process and therefore to mass produce this test. So think right now of like our past 2 years and how much these PCRs have helped, our daily lives. And we knew when to go outside, when not to do it. And all that impact could have other resources that we can find in the water and these oceans in which they have very specific situations which can help science. So that is why there's so many vested interest in this agreement. Just briefly, and for the sake of doing a complete view of what the agreement will be about, it will deal with some cross-cutting issues, of course, but then also with area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, marine genetic resources, as I said, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. So now we have a clear view of what this future agreement will be about. Let's pass to see the role of the EU. So 2 positions beforehand when we talk about the EU. The first one is the EU, as you know, works through this principle of conferral, so they only have the competencies that have been attributed to them. And in terms of environmental matters, it's a shared competence. So they have also the ability to adopt treaties internationally, but because environmental matters are a shared competence, it means that the member states also have a say in this. Therefore, in these negotiations, we have on the one side the EU, but also all of the member states. We used to have the UK, now the UK is as a separate party. But at the table of the negotiations, all of them are there. However, as it is a mixed agreement, we could have a situation where they speak with multiple mouths, as it is, but in this case, they have been choosing to speak through a single mouth, which means that the EU is speaking on behalf of both. But we never have to lose in mind that it is still a mixed agreement and the member states still have a say. And then the second position is that the negotiation process, when I'm referring to it, it is a very long process that started in 2006 with the ad hoc working group. Then we had a preparatory committee in the United Nations, and so far there have been 5 intergovernmental conferences. There were supposed to be 4, but sadly there was no agreement, so we're still waiting for a text, a final text that hopefully it will come in 2023. So now that we know, a bit of the situation, very important situation of the EU with the member states, I think to talk about the EU's effectiveness in this negotiation process, we first need to understand the EU's actorness. When we talk about the notion of actorness, it's the EU's identity as an international player and how the others perceive it, because that affects the effectiveness that they have. This is in the words of Rowan and Neiman, who have said that to act, to have the capacity to act allows us the capacity to be effective. So to do so, I have followed the criteria that the Bureau uses, building on previous works of Pablo and Tormi, and he chooses these 3 to explain the EU's ability to act and how the others perceive it. So the first one is recognition. Of course, the EU's identity at an international level and the ability that everyone else knows that it's a player in the table. It's not contested anymore. It's de facto in euro recognition. It's moot point to be speaking about it anyways. So the EU, for example, has participated in multiple multilateral environmental agreements, MAAs. And for example, and just so that we can see the impact in the DBNG negotiations, there have been 3 gaps so far. So the first one and the second were in 2019, and in these ones, they talk about the state parties. And then in the last one, they talk only about parties. So in all of them, they included that inside these topics, inside these notions, there will be international organizations such as the EU. So the idea that the EU will be a part of not only the negotiation process, but also a party of this agreement has never been contested. The second one is the EU's authority. So the EU's authority makes us think directly to the competence. Do they have the competence to act in these matters, in environmental matters? Yes, they do, as I said before, and it is a shared competence. The legal basis, if anyone is interested, is 191 of the TFEU, and that is the legal basis they have been going for. If you want in the Q&A, we can go a bit more in depth into the process of how the EU works in these international treaties, but I will pass through it now. And then finally, we have the EU's autonomy, which I always say that it's inversely related to the member states' autonomy. So on the one hand, when the EU acts, is limited by the member states' final acceptance. So as I said, for example, this is a mixed agreement. And because it is a mixed agreement, it means that at the end, we will have a final draft, a final result, a final text, and the EU will decide to sign or not. But then also there will come Spain, and Spain will have to decide whether they want to sign it or not, and also France and the Netherlands, etc. So the EU, who is speaking on behalf of the EU and the member states in this case, has to bear in mind the Spain's position, the Netherlands' position, because if they go beyond in the negotiations and they push forward something that the member states don't want, then they won't sign it, and then there will be, of course, a big discrepancy inside the EU, which is not wanted. So they always have to be careful with that. But then on the other hand, we have this idea of the compellingness of the external environment, which means that the EU sometimes enlarges its competence a little bit, because when you have a process such as complicated as the one I told you, started in 2006, but the idea came way before, a member state will not want to jeopardize all that work and all that long process and international negotiations, even though they don't agree with something. So then they will be more likely to actually ratify and become a party of the agreement and therefore become bound by it. And that leaves the EU a little bit more leeway than they would normally have, and more competence, with more autonomy than they would normally have. So that is more or less the basis of the EU's position or the EU's ability to act internationally in this negotiation. And now to think about the effectiveness. Effectiveness is this idea of getting what is desired by the EU. It is, and I have to say beforehand, very hard to assess effectiveness in an international negotiation. So of course, there are a lot of limitations. We can talk about them also at the end. Sometimes some offers, they have equated goal achievement with effectiveness. I disagree with this notion, because what they do, or what it's done normally, is that you take the EU's objectives at the beginning of the negotiations, and then you compare them with the final text of the treaty. And then if all of the things that the EU wanted are in the final treaty, therefore the EU is very effective negotiating, which of course is not always the case, because there might be other players who are very important and wanted the same things, or there may be another myriad of reasons. So instead of choosing only goal achievement as the assessment for this effectiveness, I have chosen an assessment framework that is created by John and Overture, and it focuses on three main aspects. So the first one is the input. In this part, we need to look at the EU's policy objectives, but we have to look at the EU's policy objectives in comparison to the other players of the table. So here I have said that the EU's objectives are moderately conservative. What do I mean by this? It is, of course, hard to establish that the EU is either reformative or conservative, based or in a general way in the whole treaty, because as I said, there are a lot of elements to it. But in a general way, we can see a lot of reformative positions of the EU in which they have tried to reject the status quo, saying that we need an agreement, there's a necessity for it and it needs to happen now. There's also been a very vehement claim for more protection and more conservation for these resources. And also there has been this idea of trying to push forward the principles of the EU, with this very EU idea of externalizing their EU core values. So in this sense, it has been reformative because it's very different from what it happens right now. On the other hand, however, we have a very conservative view also of the EU, because, and when I mean conservative, I mean that they don't want to change too much from the status quo, from what we have right now. So for example, they have tried to not affect IP rights. That has been one of their main points, which means that whatever happens in this agreement, it doesn't have to touch intellectual property rights. You could be thinking already, we're talking about marine genetic resources, biotechnology. Of course, it will have a say in intellectual property, and they really want to separate that. So that is a conservative position. Also, they have tried to restrict any kind of restriction to scientific marine research. So freedom of research is very high up in the goals of the EU. And also they have tried to reinforce existing international obligations that were already, for example, in UNCLOS of 1982 or other existing treaties. And instead of building new ones, just focusing on the ones we have. So that now we know that the EU's objectives more or less are conservative. So how are they going about them? Well, they have had a very high engagement. They have been quite active in the negotiations. So we have had the delegation that they have sent to all of the intergovernmental conferences, have been composed by very large numbers of people. And also most of the member states, not all, have sent their own delegations. They have also participated through written statements. So what this means is that every once in a while, the president of the negotiations will say, okay, so every party that is here can present their own statements and say what they think of the, the current deal or of one article in concrete. And the EU has participated in most of them. So they have been quite active in the negotiations. And why have they been, this active in the negotiations? Well, because they have a vested interest, of course. They want more conservation. That was also their position in the CBD, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Nagoya Protocol on Marine Genetic Resource and Benefit Sharing. But also in this one, because they are a very big player in biotechnology, as I said. So for example, here we can see in the graph that the EU is the second largest patent applicant in biotechnology matters. Most of that is Germany, I have to also say. And then the other one is the United States, the first one, which of course sometimes, in most cases in this negotiation, are aligned with the EU. So this has given them a very vested interest to have a very high engagement so that they get what they want at the end. And then, regarding their position in the constellation of interest, as I said before, it is hard to establish for all of the topics, and I will maybe come back to the map if you want in the Q&A. But for example, in some topics which have been very controversial, is, for example, the inclusion of principles. We have had some, positions, normally the global north, who had a very settled position, and then the global south had a very different one. And the EU, while it aligned itself with the north, they have tried to fill a bridge. So their position has been sort of a bridge among the two areas. But not always with success. I can also say that. The CHE principle is the common heritage of mankind principle, but I can come back to the debate principle if you're interested in the Q&A. And then finally, we have the output, which is the goal achievement. So to check, okay, so the EU has been, of course, been at this negotiation since 2006. So what have they, got? To do so, I am normally comparing the objectives that the EU had at the beginning, and to do so, I look at a public document, which is the Council's guidelines for the Commission, which is the negotiator on behalf of the EU and the member states. And normally, or what other authors have done, is they compare with the final treaty. In comparison, I chose to do a different thing. I am comparing with the draft versions, because of course we don't have a final treaty yet, but also to see the evolution of the EU's achievement so far. However, I am relativizing this, and let me explain what I mean with relativizing this through an example. So, in the Council's guidelines, we have a series of principles, and very important in a treaty, that the EU thinks should reign this treaty. So, if you check the 3 drafts, you will see that in the first 2 of 2019, 2 to 3 principles are there, but not all of them. In exceeding the 2022 one, most of the principles that the EU wanted are in the treaty. So then one will think, okay, so the EU has been an amazing negotiator. We have all of the things that they wanted. However, we also have to consider that there are other principles which have been included to which the EU opposed quite vehemently to some of them, and they are still included. So then we will go from a high goal achievement, we could call it, to a moderate one, right? Because there are still things that they did not accomplish. However, in this case, in the principal ones, I will go for a moderate high, because the principle that they didn't want, it has been included in brackets, which means that there's still a lot of divergence up to its inclusion or not. So maybe in the final treaty it won't be there. But just so that we know, that's what I mean with the relativized idea. And then just some concluding remarks, and I feel I'm on time. So there are some limitations for this assessment for sure. The first one is that the negotiations are ongoing, so things may still change. The second one is secrecy. Of course, international negotiations, there are lots of interest at play, as you have already seen, you can imagine. Particularly, for example, and I think that might be interesting, the member states' positions are private. So there is a public document that has expressly told to the member states, you should not be speaking about your personal country position publicly. So they only do it internally with the EU. They do meetings and then they go to the negotiations, but the EU is the one speaking. So of course we could, think what the Spanish position will be on one topic or the French one, but there is no public documents on it yet. So it is sometimes hard to assess, what is really going on. Then also the fact that objectives change over time. It has been a very long negotiation. Things happen. And not all the time the documents of the objectives are public. So sometimes we only have the first ones to go with. And then the last one, correlation was not in position with goal achievement. So maybe some of the things that the EU wanted are there in the last draft, so the further revised draft. But it does not mean that the EU has been good. It just means that, for example, the United States, which was also in line with them, accomplished what they wanted. Some possible solutions that I'm working on. I have some interviews lined up with members of delegations to also change and see if the objectives are the ones that I have considered are the most important, if they were actually the important ones. And oops, okay. I'm not sure. Okay. Sorry. So that is one of the things I'm doing, and then the other one is the relativized goal achievement test. So I'm considering failures and not only successes, as some other authors have done. And then some concluding remarks. I don't want to say conclusions here because the research is still ongoing, but the result of the negotiations may still change. That is for sure. The EU has been a very active player, and I think that could go for a conclusion already because they have been participating since the beginning. They have organized intersessional workshops. So it has been a very active player. They also have maintained both reformist and conservative positions. So far, it really depends on the interest and mostly commercial, but also ecological interest, environmental. And then they have tried to position themselves as a bridge, sometimes with more success, sometimes with less. It always happens in international negotiations. And the last one, I think it's important to consider other key players while assessing the EU's role, even though I could not do it today in the conference for time's reason. But it's interesting to look at China, look at what the EU has been doing, like at the United States has been doing, and also some group associations. So you have China very aligned with the P70 event, you know, the Pacific Islands, all of those are very interesting to see how it's shaping. So thank you very much, and we have time.
I think it's the first presentation that comes with a QR code that I've seen where you can actually go into your webpage and follow you. Thank you very much, Maria, for a very interesting presentation. Any questions, comments from the audience?
Yeah, I've got a question. In your concluding remarks, you were talking about the other key players. Can you elaborate a tiny bit on that, please?
Yeah. What I mean with this is there are very interesting roles. So, for example, you can see a very clear distinction between global north and global south, as some authors call it. So, for example, in principal matters, most of the developed countries have aligned themselves. They really don't want, for example, the common heritage of mankind, and they are pushing forward for the principle of freedoms, which that will sort of continue to allow them to do what they please, as long as they maintain certain protection, you know, conservation rules. And then you also have the Southern China has been a very powerful player. They have aligned themselves quite strongly with like all of the African Union and most of the Caribbean, and they have been sort of keeping the same, you know, role so far in most of the ideas. And Russia, for example, has also been quite in line with the United States, and Japan, I think also, and Canada. Those four are the more, you know, aligned ones. Do you want to know anything else?
Any more questions?
I have one, but maybe it's a stupid question. I mean, it's from economist students. What is the benchmark to reach an agreement? I mean, you are working, studying the position of the European Union. And what is the benchmark? Is the good of the planet? Is the good of the industry? Is this has to be a winner in the Europe? I mean,
That's a very good question, very hard to answer with just one line. I don't think there is one or the other, what you're saying. Of course, there are commercial interests at hand. You know, there is a very big biotech pharma industry that will be affected probably. There's a lot of talk about, like, you know, these resources in the sea that they will cure cancer. That's always a very powerful line. So, of course, there is an economic interest. Also, there is an ecological, like, environmental interest. We are talking, for example, part of we didn't talk about it today, but the area-based management tools that they are trying to reduce the marine area, but they are trying to marine protected areas. They are called is trying to take these pieces of the ocean and then, like, you know, kind of doing, like, imagine drawing lines and then protecting them. Yeah. But that's very hard also to, like, who checks that in the middle of the ocean? How do you protect it against biopiracy? So there is, of course, I think, an environmental matter at hand, and also the treaty already says, right, is the conservation of. However, I think it's also, you know, it's conservation is environmental, it's also very economic at the end of the day, and then it's also scientific, I think, and that's a very big part of the negotiations have been going to this science-based approach. So I think it will be between those two. That's the benchmark.
When you showed that first picture at the beginning of, like, the international waters area, like, the first thing that came to mind was, like, shipping.
Yes.
And how, like, the economics of having all of the shipping routes, and those majority of the way, like, most resources are travel around the world. Where does shipping fit in with this agreement?
That's a very good question. It doesn't fit in. That is sort of the issue with the agreement, is that the agreement has, like, will not touch other agreements. So it says that it will, like, it won't touch shipping, it won't touch fishing, you know, and that is a huge framework that is out there, and it's very regionalized. So then we have the shipping conventions, then we have the fishing conventions, then we have the whaling conventions. So we have a patchwork of conventions and legal instruments right now that will be very hard to put all together. So the idea is to not touch that, but hopefully build on it. And then at some point there will be something good for the environment. But no, that is a very good question. It's, I think, one of the main criticisms, the fact that there's so many legal instruments that affect the same parts of the ocean, but through different activities that, you know, these affect, or the effectivity of these instruments could be what's point. Hopefully not, but yes.
But if the agreement doesn't touch shipping and what doesn't touch fishing, what is the agreement about?
Yes, that's very good.
Because it's about, protecting the oceans, and you have the two most, you have a lot of advantages, but the industries that create the biggest problems are excluded from the agreement.
It should, the idea is to tackle the conservation, so trying, for example, to leave these areas where the shipping will go around, hopefully, or that's the idea, like hopefully not, like if it's settled, it will go around, it will leave those areas and those ecosystems protected. And also it will stop, for example, from seabed mining, which is also an industry that they are trying to start up now. When seabed mining is very profitable, but of course it completely destroys the ecosystem forever. So that will sort of be avoided with this agreement. And then also it will create a regulation for access and use of the resources, which this means is that, the United States or whoever has, I think United States just because they have normally the money, but any player who has the money or the corporate who has the money will not go to the oceans, and they will extract whatever they want and will take everything, and then, do science and patents and then not leave anything to the other parts of the world. So the idea is to create a system for this access and also to share the benefits. And that's also the second part of the marine ethics resources is benefit sharing. And how that will happen is something that has not been yet completely tackled. But there's talk about monetary benefit sharing and then non-monetary benefit sharing, which is information and science. So that also will be regulated, and right now it's not, so no one has access except the players who can afford to do it.
But forgive my ignorance again. When you're talking about seabed mining, I don't think we have this acknowledging, correct me if I'm wrong, to do seabed mining in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where the average is 4,000 meters below sea level. It's started, but it's mostly done in territorial waters. So most of it would not be actually protected by this agreement. It's just protecting what might happen in the future.
Yes, it does happen. Yes, and also they're always thinking ahead with the technology, like what you cannot have also with the benefits of the resources, because there's always the idea that this will be a mine of gold, and it has not proven to be a mine of gold yet, but they hope it will be, then they really want to regulate it before that happens. So it's still playing the long game.
Okay. Go ahead.
This is interesting because we actually have friends who are trying to raise equity quite successfully to harvest seaweed. The idea of processing them into biotech products, pharma, food. So it's quite interesting to see how the raising of equity and a startup.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I was not expecting anything so very interesting. They should be here. Yes.
Okay, and there's no other questions, just 2 questions from me, but don't get back to the map. So
Okay,
it's now the first thing is your dissertation is about process, and which I find it very, very interesting. But how does the BBNJ agreement differ from any sort of agreement in terms of the process that you mentioned, this whole idea of secrecy, the need to keep negotiations and positions consistent with the European level, the role of the European Union trying to increase its powers by expanding its powers. Is it different for your agreement than for any other agreement that the European Union is involved in at a global level?
That is a very interesting question, and there are differences, and I think that's probably something that I was not expecting when I started to see. For example, in environmental matters, you have climate, and then you have biodiversity normally. And in climate, we have seen this idea of the EU being a big player, but also the member states being a big player. So they have been speaking, for example, I think it's in Copenhagen, and I think also in Kyoto, the EU spoke about on the EU's behalf. But then the member states also took to the floor in an international setting, and then they went for also the floor. In exchange, we have seen in biodiversity agreements that the EU has been speaking on behalf of both. So that has been different in the process. That they do have this single, single idea, or like they will maintain a single position. but they have normally done it through like multiple maps, it's called by some authors, which means that both the member states in the EU that have been speaking publicly about it and have given their positions. And in this case, it goes more in line with the Nagoya Protocol and the CDT, in which the member states were not quite in the agreement because they have vested interest, but they have been speaking internally. That has been very different.
And in terms of your map, and you said we should go back to the map, and I couldn't help noticing that the EU has created this idea that it has got a massive soft power in setting up regulations across the whole world. And one is the internet. The internet may have been or may be owned mostly by the Americans, but the regulation of the internet is fundamentally driven by Europeans. Then I look at your map, and the European Union seems to be completely isolated. Apart from Turkey, the UK, and New Zealand, is all the developing world saying we don't support your position, and then no support from the other big players, in this case, Russia, the United States, Canada, and the big countries outside Europe.
I have to do a position. It does not mean that the EU is isolated. So this is about a principles debate. Okay, so there is on the one hand the common heritage of mankind, and on the other hand is the principle of freedoms. So the ones you see in light blue, they have claims for the principle of freedoms, while all of the red has been very vehemently for the other one. The EU has aligned itself with the North, also quite publicly and expressly, but they decided to switch the strategy, and I should have stopped here. They switched the strategy to stop saying it so publicly. So they do still consider this idea, but what they have been doing is that they chose a pragmatic approach, and they said, okay, we will not arrive to any conclusion on this topic. Let's table it, and then we'll come back to it. So this is what this map was about. It was the statements about after the fourth intergovernmental conference, in which all of the ones in red expressly said again that they wanted this principle, while the light blue ones decided to not say anything, but they have already spoken also quite openly that either there will be a principle of freedoms or there will be no agreement. And then the dark blue, which is the EU, and also the UK, they did both separate ones because this one was after Brexit. They decided to not talk about it, and they have switched sort of their position, trying to become this bridge, saying like, okay, maybe we don't need this principle, but we can create, like the sharing benefit, the benefit sharing mechanism can can compensate to both parties. So they are trying to regulate. It's not regulated yet, so they are still isolated in the fact that they don't. No one wants to change the position, but it is mostly aligned with the northern countries.
But I mean, the European Union has changed its position slightly.
It has moderated.
Moderated its position, but it hasn't brought anyone on board.
No, not yet.
Right, so fine, maybe it's too early.
Well,
And then final thing from me is I know you might want to go and watch Brazil against South Korea. You said that the EU was keeping at the same time positions that were reformist and they were conservative at the same time. So how can you juggle both?
Yes. So when I mean reformative or conservative is this idea of that it's close to the status quo or not. So reformative, because there are so many elements, as we have seen to the treaty, we have these big four parts. In some of them, they have wanted a bigger change. So, for example, the fact that there is regulation at all, it is a big change. So, in that sense, we will go for a reformative position. Also, the fact that there needs to be protection. The EU is very, very adamant about the need of protection and conservation of the environment, which not all of the players internationally do. So, in that sense, it is quite reformative. Also, in this idea of pushing forward its principles. However, we also have this idea of, things should change, but let's not touch too much other things, which is, for example, the idea with IP rights. If you see all of the suggestions of the EU to IP, is more or less taking away all of the text that is written and saying, let's, whatever this agreement will be, let's not undermine what already happens with WTO, rules. So that is quite conservative, the fact that, okay, lovely everything, but please don't touch IP. And also with a few other ideas on scientific freedom and all of those. So they have tried to, do change, but not too much.
Well, thank you very much. To Maria, to Pablo, of course, to Victor, for all the organization of the process of this lecture. To everyone who has come, and remember to all of you that have been following us on our YouTube channel, to keep on following us on our social media, mainly on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and we have a packed schedule of events coming after Christmas and New Year in the Lent term, which will start on the first week of term, which is the week of the 17th of January, with one lecture on global value chains. In fact, it will be a debate, and then one on the development of Africa. Then we'll have one discussion in February with people from the European Commission on development tracks, followed by the governor of the Bank of Spain that will be coming and talking about economic development. And then we'll be in Spain, and then we'll be having another fellows lecture towards the end of the term, like this one, with 5 new fellows that will be coming. So keep looking and following us on social media. You get information about all this. Keep on, if you want to come and do a fellowship at the LSE, you can see the quality of our fellows. They're very good. Probably they have also improved significantly from the benefits of exchanging information and learning from what's happening here at the LSE. So don't forget to apply. The next round will be in January, for people that want to come for the summer term, starting at the beginning of May 2023. So thank you very much for coming here. Merry Christmas to all of you. Enjoy the Christmas party, and let's hope that either Spain or England win the World Cup.